hi, I'm Adam, and I will be doing the individual video and code review for the messages subgroup and the DM subgroup. And so we have a few main use cases in the subgroup. The first being the initial message that you use to create, or the initial request you send to a user to create the message thread. And so I can write here for this object, I want this object. And I can send a request. And so that's the first use case, and it says if you sent it, you can go to your messages. If I go here, I can see I want this object. And if we go to our other tab here, which is AA, we can see that there's also a pending chat here. And I can either accept the request or decline the request. And so if we go to our code, hold on a second. If we go to our code, we can see that we have, this is the front end. So this is the front end DM page here. And we can see that we have the accept request code here, or the decline request code here. And this DM page corresponds to this actually internal page here, right? So this is the DM page. And if we go to our code, it is a pretty long file, but it's basically just initializing a bunch of state variables that will change when we change things on the web page. And then there's a lot of functions that define the behaviors that happen when users change things and the requests they send over to our API. And these are the URLs that it'll send it to. And that is basically it. I can go through one here, which is send message, which is an asynchronous function. And if the message is not trimmed, or if it's not a chat, or if they're not actually in the chat, then return. So that means they're trying to send a message even though it's impossible. There's no message, and they're not actually in a valid chat right now. But if it's not, then we'll go through here, and it'll try to fetch all of, it'll fetch this, sorry, this is a post request, so it is fetching, but we are sending over the message that we have typed out in the message box. So if we go here and go like this, hi there, send that, and we should wait a few seconds. We can see it says hi there. So that uses the send message function right here. And so it'll send our content, which is in the message input. And if it resolves fine, then it will not throw an error. If it doesn't resolve, it will throw an error. And it will await the new message. And so that is basically that one. But as you can see here, if we press accept, and we can set the dates and stuff, that corresponds to this code here, right? So when the button is clicked, it will show the set date modal, which we have a modal, or a little widget here. There we go. We have a little widget, and it will show that date pop up there. And so that's the first use case. And I'll go over the other pages. Let's reduce this. We'll go over the other pages as well. And so that was the main DM page, and this is our code for the message bubble. And I guess I will actually decrease this so you can. And here is the message bubble page. So this corresponds to these bubbles here. And this one's pretty simple. If the bubble is me, or if it's actually my messages and stuff like that, it'll have class message row, and then the class either me or other. Me if it's me, other if it's not. So if it's me, it'll show up over here. This will be what the classes are put on it to make it go over here. And if it is not me, then it will show up over here. Right, so that's message bubble, and message bubble is used in DM page. Right, we import it there, and then we use it down here. If we go back, we can see that, well, we can't see it anymore, but this is the chat thread page. So if we have ending chats, it's down here. This is the chat thread component, which we can see here. It's pretty short. But this is the bigger component, which is the message page component, which is this whole message page here. And so chat thread is actually used within the message page component here. And as you can see, there is a lot of logic and state tracking. So there's the states here, tab, search, chats, error. And we have some use effects things here. So this one, it's an asynchronous function that fetches all the chats on when this page went to. So before anything else happens, it will try to fetch the chats from our URL here, which will go to our API, and we are passing on a API token for each person so that we know that they're actually a valid user that's logged in and they're not just a random person. And then if it's okay, then it will get the data and it'll set all of the chats to our data, which is returned, which we will be going over the back end in a bit. And all of these things are just like that, right? And so that we have variables for our pending chats, archive chats, and closed chats, and we use these down here. If there are pending chats, then we will create a chat thread for the pending chats. And we do it by tab, right? So if the tab is active, it'll show the chats, right? So this is active tab, this is the active tab here. And so each button we click on, it will show the chats, right? And so that is the main. We also have our search bar. Oh yeah, this is our search bar for the messages here, and we do not use our built-in widget. We actually create a different one here. And then we also have our bottom navigation bar, which is down here. This is the bottom nav bar. And we've already gone through some of the other use cases of sending a message, seeing the messages. That's another use case that we have seen. And I think that's it for the actual use cases. Then we can go on to the back-end code. And so here are all of our, if I can go to the debug tab and go to the views tab, we can start views, which are just basically the logic between how we get data to the front end and what, maybe calculations go on behind the scenes. And so we have quite a few back-end functions here, views. Our first one is decline chat view. So if you remember, we clicked that decline button in our chat last time with the user here. There was a decline and accept. Click the decline. If that decline button is clicked, this view will run. And so we won't go through every view, but we'll go through this one. And basically, it gets their profile. It tries to get the chat. If it doesn't exist, it returns an error. But if it does exist, it keeps on going. And so if the chat is a lender, if it belongs to a lender, the user who's going to the chat, and the lender is not equal to profile, it'll also give an error because the only person who can hit the decline or the accept button is the lender. That's the whole point. So it will set the chat status to archived and then transaction completed because, again, they declined the request, right? So there's no more that communication that has to go on for that item because they do not want the borrower to borrow the item, right? And it creates the message that just says it has been declined, right? And then it returns just a success statement. We have my chats view, and so as you can see here, there's a comment that says it returns all active chats for the user's profile. And so that's exactly what it does. It gets the profile, it gets their chats that belong to them, either if they're the lender or the borrower, which is basically all their chats. And then for each chat, it will get all of the messages. It will get the last message. It'll get the transaction that it belongs to. And we'll get, if one of the ones they're a lender, the ones they're the borrower. Oh, ow. And it will get the chat name. And then it will append all of these results into a dictionary so that we can unpack it on the front end. And then it returns the results. Then we have, let's just get rid of these two here. And then we have send message view, which was the one we were talking about before, where this, of course, sends a message. So it gets the request and the chat ID, and then gets the profile, tries to get the chat, gets the context of the message. And if there is no context, then there's an error because obviously they can't send an empty message. And once they get the message, once they get the message data, we actually create a message object in the database that uses the chat, the profile, the content, and the timestamp. Pretty simple. And then it returns just some success information here. And that is the main thing in our database, which I can go to in models. We can go to, chat right here. So chat and messages are very simple. We just have the transaction the chat belongs to, when it was created, its status, whether it's open or closed or in process, or here we go, active, open, or archived. And then we have our message, which is we have the chat that it belongs to, the sender, which we saw there is the person who sent the message, the content of the message, the transaction it belongs to, just in case we can pull from that easier than having to pull from chat. and then the timestamp. And so those are the pretty simple models that go in the database. And then if we go back to views, we can keep going. So this is the chat detail view, and this just gets all of the prerequisite data for each individual chat, right? So if we go down here, it gets things like the photo, the owner, the description, the status, the category, the name for the listing, and that would be shown here, right? So this is what chat detail view is getting. It's getting the person's name, it's getting the picture, the owner's name, the item content, and then other things like that. All the messages, right? And so that is... So this is like the view for the individual chats here, while the other view we saw was for all of these ones here, because it was getting the most recent message. So we've gone through that one. We have check existing chats, which does exactly that. It just checks if a chat already exists for a listing, and if their chat already exists between the two people, that has already been done. And then we go down here. And so for the start chat view, it goes over this use case right here, which is the request listing. So when someone sends that initial request listing message, it will just create the chat if no chat exists already, right? And so if it'll check for all these things, the borrower, the listing ID, the message, the lender, and if it can find an existing transaction with all of those things, then it will just use that transaction as T. But if not, then it will create a new transaction here. So if the chat is created successfully, then it will get all of these things, create the initial message from the system that says the borrower has requested this item, and then it will create the user's actual message that was passed into this view up there, and that will be the, quote, first message in the message chat. Only 2 more views to go. We have the approve borrow request. And so this is the button I clicked before that the lender can approve the request to borrow. And as we can see, we saw the front end for that on the DM page here. But basically, if the user doesn't accept the request, then it just archives the chat and resets kind of everything else. And then finally, we have the mark item returned, which is the last use case for the message subgroup. And once the item is returned, this page right here, I can click I have returned the item, and then that will be what this use case is, and it just lets the system know that we have returned the item and that the transaction is complete, and that saves, and then we archive the chat here. And that is all of the code, all of the back-end logic, and the front-end code of our website. Thank you so much.